and welcome to this pre-budget special here on Headlines Today in collaboration with FICCI. It's the day before B-Day, the big day for Arun Jaitley, the Finance Minister. All eyes will be on him. Can he deliver? Can Arun Jaitley recraft the economy and seize the opportunity? Certainly that's what the economic survey which has been released today seems to suggest. This could be India's sweet spot, is what the economic survey is suggesting. But what are the big challenges that face Mr. Jaitley? Can he bite the bullet is the big question that we will raise on this special here. Joining me now, Jyotsna Suri, the president of FICCI, Siddharth Birla, industrialist and immediate past president of FICCI, Naina Lal Kidwai, chairman India of HSBC and also a past president of this organization, Surjit Bhalla, always the angry young man as I call him, economist and chairman of Oxis Investments, Arvind Virmani, former chief economic advisor to the government, Sanjay Baru, author, journalist, fellow at CPR, Center for Policy Research and economist. Appreciate all of you joining us on this special. Let's start with that big point, the sweet spot. This is what is being suggested. What is the mood in industry today ahead of the budget? Is there a sense of optimism? Is there a sense that industry will always be optimistic about budgets in the sense that you don't want to get on the wrong side of the finance minister?
I certainly don't want to get on the wrong side of the finance minister. That goes without saying. However, industry is actually quite positive. We are looking at this budget. Of course, I've said that many a time that no budget can make or break the economy of India. However, there is optimism. We are optimistic. We are looking to a budget that is going to show a vision, the way forward for India to get back onto its development mode.
Is there a cautious optimism? Because let's be honest, the rail budget, wasn't the kind of big bang rail budget that we expected, Mr. Birla. Is there a sense that maybe, it isn't quite, that this government is still unwilling to take those big bang reforms? And when we talk of big bang reforms, what's the kind of big bang reform that you'd like to see Mr. Jaitley bring to the table tomorrow?
Okay, I don't think we want him to be very creative, but let me quickly come back to your sweet spot. As anybody who plays golf knows, sweet spot is not a dot, but it's a region. So I think we are in the sweet spot that the economic survey talks about, that we are in about the right space, because the next economic survey at the end of next year will already be too late. So I think we are in the right region to take decisions. We are constrained fiscally. At the same time, we have to get the investments going. So I think really speaking, policy clarity, taxation clarity, roadmap on the way forward, resolving inverted duty structures, and whatever can be done to look at the competitiveness of manufacturing is where I expect this budget to focus.
I'll come to some of the specifics you've raised in a moment, but let's look, Surjit, at what exactly was said. India has reached a sweet spot. This is what the economic survey says today, and there is scope for big bang reforms now. A clear mandate for reform and a benign external environment now is expected to propel India on a double-digit trajectory. It's projecting the economy to grow at 8.1%. Is Mr. Subramaniam, Chief Economic Advisor, pulling the wool over our eyes, creating this rosy picture? Because we want to, this is all about Achhe Din. So you want to project the image of Achhe Din? Have they really come?
I don't think he's exaggerating at all, actually. I think 8.1, if we don't achieve without additional reforms, so in other words, I'm keeping reforms out. 7.5 to 8 is, if we will, a done deal baked.
It's done deal?
Baked. Because of, let's look at what the
That's an outlier. As usual, Surjit, you're projecting and you're being the outlier.
No, let's look at what I'll give some concrete meaning to the sweet spot. Oil prices way down, and that adds a huge element to our, if you will, reduces our subsidy bill. Second, our import bill. Second, inflation. What hasn't been given enough attention by the media, etc., is that inflation, we are on, if you will, what people call a disinflation course. Well set in. So in other words, while we are talking about 5.5 inflation, and that's what the economic survey also talks about.
Yes.
They are, if you will, being quite confident that the inflation figure will be well below 5.5% in my view. So it'll be somewhere around 4 is where I think inflation will turn out to be. So just think about it. Oil prices down, inflation down to 4%. You've got the new measurement of GDP, which for the last year, and clearly there have been a lot of issues, etc. Be that as it may, that's what we have. So if last year, 2014-15, we grew at 7%, why can't we grow at 7.5%, 8% next year?
There you've got a former chief economic advisor now being far more skeptical. Let me give the other side of the story, which also in a sense needs to be looked at. The fact is, earnings of the country's top 100 companies shrunk by 6% in the last quarter. Private investment and consumer demand still weak. Merchandise exports are falling. So it's not as if all the achhe din that Surjit seems to have bought into is actually true on the ground.
So the positives, I agree with the economic survey and Sujit, but they've ignored one important negative, I'm afraid, and that is global demand. Global demand for what may be called globally traded goods is going to have a big drag on the whole global economy as well as on India. And as one manifestation of that is actually the corporate sector, because the corporate sector is the part of the Indian economy which is globally competitive. So I believe, which has not been stated in the economic survey, that is having a depressing effect on the corporate profits.
So is that where Mr. Jaitley needs to, is that an issue that Mr. Jaitley needs to address? There's been much talk, Mr. Birla just now raised it, for example, tax reform. A number of people have been telling me, and Dr. Baru, you perhaps as someone who knew Dr. Manmohan Singh are best placed to look at this. I was told 1991, Dr. Singh brought in the first revolution with trade liberalization. Now it's time for the second revolution to be brought in with tax liberalization, with tax reform, particularly corporate tax reform, making it actually easy to translate what Prime Minister Modi says, make in India, ease of doing business into reality. Is that the challenge before the finance minister come tomorrow?
Well, I think to be fair to Chidambaram, we should remember that his dream budget of
That's right, the 1997 dream budget is where it all began.
The real tax reductions came at that time. So, the kind of tax reform we are now talking of cannot be as dramatic as what Chidambaram did in 97. I don't actually expect much action on the tax front, at least in terms of liberalization of reduction of rates. Maybe administrative reform, procedural reform, tax reform in a procedural sense, but those are all long-term initiatives. I don't actually think that the revenue side, the finance minister has much headroom. If he has to do anything, he has to do more on public investment to promote growth, which then will bring in the revenues. In other words, raising revenues cannot be the focus of this year's budget, in my view.
Nainal Kidwai? The challenge is to, I presume, increase business confidence. There's a sense that despite the talk of Make in India, it hasn't yet translated on the ground to increase confidence. You've heard what Deepak Parekh has been saying, that, I haven't seen visible change on the ground. What does the finance minister need to do to restore that sense of confidence, to give these are numbers which the economic survey talks about, which Surjit is saying 8.5, 1 could be double digit. But on the ground, what does the finance minister need to do?
So I think what's quite critical is we are seeing a fall off in demand. Consumer durables, auto, FMCG, some of it because rural spending is down because the support prices are down correctly, I believe. That's helped with inflation. But at the end of the day, the funds available to rural, agricultural India, as was available in the past, has been yanked back. And so that demand has shrunk, and demand in the rest of India, urban India, whatever, has not picked up. So anything that puts money back in terms of purchasing by the individual helps. It helps sentiment because you see the demand come back into companies whose capacity utilizations are still
Give me an
not
example.
100%.
Give me an example of what you think will stir that sense of consumer
So we
demand.
have a couple of things which we will feel in terms of the lag effect. After all, the reduction in fuel bills will help the middle class. Inflation reduction helps the middle class. The more funds you put in the hands of people to invest, and the feel-good feeling is another one which will clearly help. So those that own asset classes like equity benefit, because it does come through in terms of a feel-good feeling. But we do need to see more of that. I really want to also highlight what Sanjay said, and we've talked about infrastructure ad nauseum, but the multiplier effect for India of spend in infrastructure is just enormous, unlike, say, China today. And that focus is something which you must give credit to the Modi government to actually look at putting back on track. It's taking longer, hence our frustration, than all of us would like to see. But the fact is, it is there. And the railway budget too, while it doesn't get into the nitty-gritties of the near term, the opening up railways to joint ventures and setting up logistic companies and the spend that it will bring from the private sector is enormous, because it's not going to be a dog in the manger attitude that the railways have had in the past. And I think the budget has to be lauded for that strategic direction alone.
No, I take the point that one of the strengths of the railway budget was there was a genuine attempt to depoliticize the railway budget. No new rail lines. It wasn't the usual populist budget. But the sense is, where is the big idea? Is that what you will, infrastructure is seen as the key area where this finance minister needs to kickstart infrastructure. What will it take to give a sense that, that the country is on the move? What would you like to see Mr. Jaitley do?
See, I already spoke about how to keep the public investment cycle going, because until the corporates start spending, and we think that the corporates are not really going to start spending before the end of this year. Okay, so
most of you are investing still outside India rather than inside India. There's a sense that the big corporates are still looking at the rest of the world and not India. Is that not true?
I don't think that's true anymore. But that is it was true a year ago.
It was true. Is that only in the past? I mean, the fact is that I haven't seen major projects come up in the last 6 months. Also, everyone seems to be in pause mode.
I'm already telling you that, for example, the corporate sector will start spending by the end of this year. So, if you look at one investment story in a while, it makes headlines that so and so is looking abroad, but it is no longer what it was earlier. But I'll just come back quickly. The public investment cycle has to be kept on. All of it can't be done through the budget. Some might have to be done through public sector balance sheets. Some might have to be done through specialized structures by inviting public-private partnership or inviting foreign capital, even in the form of long-term capital, not permanent capital. And his scope for giving away on the revenue side is also very, very limited, which is why I limited my tax thing only to improving inverted duty structures. And let us see what can we do on the competitiveness side, because unless India becomes competitive, fully competitive, both internally and externally, we are not going to have a jump in our domestic growth.
GST, we haven't touched on GST.
I'm coming to
one area you're likely to see in the budget tomorrow, which we haven't discussed, is ports and shipping, because that is under the control of the central government. I would expect to see a roadmap of the kind, well, not exactly of the kind in railways, because that's a whole budget in itself, but some indications in the budget, at least a couple of paragraphs, how infrastructure in that area, whether it's internal.
And public-private partnership, is that the way out? Is that simply the way forward that you're looking at? That there should be a signal which should be sent out that this PPP model still can work?
It can work, but it's not the only way out. We must keep that in mind. It is definitely something that we look forward to. However, one of the issues that is holding corporate investment is the cost of capital. The cost of capital is too high, and those who want to start new projects can't really afford to, and those who are already in it and want to expand find it too difficult to borrow at that level and make their return of investment feasible.
The key, the word that was explained, GST. Many believe that, again, we've heard, previous finance ministers also set deadlines. April 2016 is supposedly, when GST will come into force. Many believe it in itself will bring 1-2%, increase in growth rates. Do you believe that Arun Jaitley has now the mandate? He's got a majority government. Let's be fair to the previous finance ministers. They had a minority government, a coalition government. Mr. Jaitley by now should be in a position to push ahead with GST, for example.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we've been at it for 13 years, different governments, etc., from the time the idea was first mooted in early 2002, 2003. What the economic survey does say quite sort of almost explicitly is that Jaitley has got the agreement with the states. So in other words, the stumbling block was that the states were not on board.
So you think that a GST regime should be in place by April 2016?
That is what the economic survey is hinting at. That is to say,
you don't see the Mamta Banerjees and others sort of not allowing Mr. Jaitley that leeway, that space that he would like.
even Mamata Banerjee has constraints to what she can do. So therefore, I think,
More importantly,
That's interesting. I'd like to know what are the constraints that Mamata Banerjee has to her in public life. But let's be clear. You've got a majority government. How much of a difference, Dr. Baru, does that make? The fact that tomorrow you have a finance minister, forget about what happened in July. That was, to all extent, an interim budget. Now you've got a full budget of a majority government. Is it easier in a majority government to push ahead with reform?
we'll come to reform later, but specifically on GST, it's not just about this fact that this is a majority government. It is that this government is willing to accept the recommendations of the Finance Commission on devolution to states, increasing state share in total revenue to 42%.
That's right, and it says that fiscal federalism,
which is a revolution in itself.
which is fiscal federalism is a commitment.
Yes, therefore, the finance minister, I hope tomorrow will say in his speech that I'm willing to accept this recommendation of the Finance Commission, because incidentally, unlike what many people are thinking, he's not duty bound to accept it. He need not accept it, but he can actually accept it and say that in the interest of cooperative federalism, I'm giving the states more revenue, and in return, I'm expecting their support on GST, and link the two.
And Rajdeep, don't forget that the way the coal auctions have gone, 6 states are big beneficiaries of that. It's not as if the centre is holding it. So unfortunately, it's not going to help the fisc as much as we would have thought. But there is a big devolution of the coal auction amounts to the states. So they are practicing beyond just through the Finance Commission's own contributions in the way that the states are going to be compensated.
But you know, as we've seen, the budget
assets.
at the end of the day is a political document. It requires you to balance various conflicting political interests. The previous government believed that schemes like Manrega, farm loan waiver were politically schemes that help them win elections. Mr. Jaitley and Mr. Narendra Modi don't have to worry about that for the next 4 years as well. Does that make it even more important? The first year of a budget, this is the first year of his government. This is his big moment.
This is the big moment. You know, I've heard
he's got
people
big
say,
elections next year. Next year it will be in the face of elections in a state like Bengal.
Let me say, I've heard people say, oh, this is a 5-year program, this, that, etc. Nobody is giving Modi or Jaitley a 5-year option. It has to start tomorrow. Nobody is expecting that what is said tomorrow happens immediately. But they have to have, somebody mentioned about a vision. They have to have a vision statement. These are our goals. This is how we get there. This is how much time it will take. We hope it can be done faster.
But in a democracy like India, there will be pulls and pressures. We are already seeing it over the Land Acquisition Act.
but
we are all, I'm sure corporate India has a different view on the Land Acquisition Act. But the various leaders who are emerging and the political parties are presenting a different picture. They believe that the Land Acquisition Act, in its present form, the ordinance certainly is anti-farmer. So I'm just wondering, the pulls and pressures will be there.
So one thing should be absolutely clear. They don't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha. So anybody who expects there will be a legislative agenda in the budget, I think are going to be severely disappointed. There will be nothing on legislation which they do not feel can be passed in Rajya Sabha. That's one. The second thing is, of course, we've not discussed, but the budget is about the macro financial and fiscal objectives and outlook of the government. Yes, we all expect that they will spell out those 3 elements more clearly.
But you've got a huge opportunity. Given declining oil prices, this is a great opportunity perhaps for you to not for once be worried
about
to the
what?
same extent about your fiscal deficit. You could go ahead this time. You could go ahead this time with expenditure, government spending.
So you want to break the fiscal limits which were set in the last budget?
There are two views. I've heard economists say this is an opportunity to go ahead with expenditure, not worry about fiscal deficit. Others saying no, 4.1%, even lower, you can keep your targets.
Sweet spot means you can have your cake and eat it too. Oil prices have declined, food subsidies are declining, okay? So therefore you add the 2 of them up, and then you have room for the fiscal deficit. Basically oil and food subsidies together, the decline in them add about 1.5% to GDP. So you can increase expenditures on capital expenditures, etc., by another 1% to 1.5% of GDP and still be within your fiscal target.
Let me tell you what happened in 2010. There was a need to reduce the fiscal deficit. They got extra funds from auctions. Despite that, they increased the fiscal deficit. That's the wrong way to go completely. Once you get into that trap, you'll never get out of it.
No, I'm
sorry.
just wondering
So
whether
I'm on one of those
No, I'm
two
just
sides you
wondering
mentioned.
whether this is the moment to spur investment. Anything
is.
that can
It is.
spur
It is.
investment
It
is the
is.
challenge. I mean, is there an acceptance, particularly from the point of view of industry? Does industry believe that, as I said, the first year of a government, this is where you are going to be tested. From next year, politics will take over. Once elections are there in Bengal, in Assam, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, then the finance minister may well be constrained by politics. This year, is it all about how do you spur investments?
It
How do you
is.
get jobs?
It is. It is about how do you spur investments, and the investments in turn will get jobs. So there has to be some expenditure on those infrastructure projects that we are talking about, which need to be pushed. That will give immediate employment straight away to people.
And how-
And by the
is
way,
that actually? What
it's
would you
not
suggest?
it's not just infrastructure. There are public sector companies that have the ability to spend as well. What I think is a concern is the over leveraging in the corporate sector, which is not permitting the private sector to invest the way it could. But there's a number of companies in the public sector, other than the oil refining companies who are now correcting, that do have funds sitting on their balance sheets, which should be out there being spent as well. So a big push could come from government to its own, even as the private sector begins to get its act together. But that spending is very, very key. And by the way, I'm certainly of a school, although, yes, history does show that when fiscs go out of control, they aren't spent the way they should. But the time has come for us to correct our fisc from being a current expenditure to a more capital expenditure based one. So the quality of our fisc is awful. And more attention has to be given to the quality of the fisc. And if that can somehow be written in blood, I'm okay with a fisc, which 4.1 will be achieved, but it is being achieved by rolling over necessary expenditure every year. I mean, it's a total sham. What we should have is a budget which is realistic, which sees capex, which cuts down current expenditure. We have 80% goes into current expenditure, 20% to capital. It should be the other way around.
Yes, sir.
Just to summarize what we've had in the last few minutes. Number one, on GST, at least from industry's point, I believe this is the nearest we've ever got to having a GST. And, there is agreement between the states, etc.
Is it really going to be the kind of game changer that it's projected as?
Yes.
I put it the other way. If it doesn't happen, I think the
What
outcome
rate?
is going to be very,
We
very
don't know
bad.
what rate.
So, number one, the introduction of GST and the introduction of GST at a what I call a sort of rational rate, because there are a number of rates that are being thrown around. So one would probably imagine that the GST would come at a slightly higher rate than the final rate, and giving the FM room to move downwards later. But if it's at a very high rate, because we haven't covered every part of the economy, then what's going to happen is that the incentive to evade GST will again come in.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a risky factor, that we'll introduce GST and not get the revenues. But I believe that as long as the rate is rational, which could be maybe 22% or something to begin with and then going down, perhaps I think we are the closest today to having a GST than not having a GST. That's one. If I could just take the other point, which was on the fiscal and the capital spending. I think the biggest signal, see, on one hand, people are talking about expanding the fiscal deficit, but on one hand, you pour in money into the economy. On the other hand, the RBI doesn't reduce the interest rates because money is coming in, etc. So I think there is a lot to be said for sticking to the discipline which Mr. Jaitley has been advocating. What is very important, and therefore, the number which he's been advocating can be relaxed as a measure of last resort. And maybe he can find other ways, as I also mentioned, as Nana mentioned, get public sector companies to spend, have lots of policy reforms very quickly to invite global capital, not permanent capital, not FDI, but I'm talking global capital to come into projects, into PPP projects, into government finance
Railways,
projects.
that was one of the
Railways, for
things
example.
But global capital is also waiting. Global capital is not going to, they are also in a competitive world. My point is, and again, returning to the survey itself, it says this is an opportunity for big bang reforms. Is Mr. Modi an instinctive reformer? Is a question. There are those who believe that, perhaps like Surjit, who believe that Modi has to be Margaret Thatcher, dismantle the public sector. There's a sense that Mr. Modi, if you look at Gujarat, has been much more cautious than many people believe he is. Do you believe him to be an instinctive reformer, or is he a politician first and going to look at the political fallout of any decision he takes? Even today on Manrega, in his speech on the vote of thanks to the president's address. Very careful to say, I will not dismantle Manrega.
No, but that's the right thing to say. I mean, what he said in Parliament today was a clever political speech. But I think tomorrow is the last chance, both for Mr. Modi and Mr. Jaitley, particularly because this is not their first budget. This is their second budget. And
what do you mean by last chance?
Because the first budget was a damn squib. The fact is that in 91, it is within 2 months of coming to power that Narasimha Rao brought in the historic budget. Just took him 2 months.
Because he had to.
Yeah, exactly, because he had to. But this time round, the first budget, which was July 9, 2014, was a damn squib. And therefore, everybody expects that this time this government would finally do things which would get the economy back on track. If they fail now, I don't think
so therefore when you say last chance, you're saying last chance in terms of confidence in the Modi government's ability to kickstart the economy. Because let's be clear, Sanjay, one of the reasons why he was given a mandate in 2014 was because we'd had 4 years of low growth or 5 years of low growth and high inflation. Now he's been very lucky. Some say achhe sitare hai, achhe din nahi. Now he's got to use those achhe sitare.
Last chance to take advantage of that sweet spot we are talking about.
Right.
The slogan of this government is Make in India. And you have been asking the question, why is Indian business not investing in India? Why is it that many of them are actually investing outside India? They are not investing in India for the last 4 or 5 years because India was not an attractive place to invest in. So ease of doing business, making it easier for businessmen, Indian businessmen, forget about foreign investors, to invest in this country. That is what reform is about. And I have always said again and again that Bharat Mein Banao has to be linked to Bharat Ko Banao. In other words, the Make in India program has to be linked to nation building. And only if you do that can you sell the reforms you're talking about, because as Naina just said, 91 you had a crisis. Today you don't have a crisis, you're in a sweet spot. Hello, why should I do anything? Oil prices are low. I will coast along with 7 to 8% growth without doing much. On the other hand, this is the time to do.
And when you say business reform, so is this about business reform, about which the Prime Minister keeps emphasizing? My reform is about making it easier to do business in India. Now that's not implement on the ground. Businessmen still tell me that there are far too many permissions they've got to take.
You have to be very careful about what is your definition of big bang. When I say there won't be big bang, that doesn't mean there won't be a good budget. I agree. He has to have a good budget. There is no question about that. But what I object to is this big bang and last chance. I'm sorry. There is no such thing. I have not seen it in 20 years. So, your specific question. So the question is,
you haven't seen it in 20 years because that was the last time they had a big bang.
By the way, there were two outstanding budgets. There were two outstanding budgets in both cases.
Which were the two?
92 and 2007. Okay.
You believe 92 and 2007 were the two outstanding budgets in
both those cases, it was something completely surprising that nobody expected those two things to happen. We worked it out inside the ministry. Nobody had proposed it outside neither of those things. What I am saying is that's not going to happen. There is not going to be a big surprise, though by definition, a surprise cannot be anticipated. Business. Yes. Just the final, your specific question. Yes, it is about giving a clear message, a credible message about what you're going to do about ease of business, and you have it under your control. The whole tax system, the tax administration, we just talk generally about tax administration, but what are you going to do? You have to have a credible demonstration of that in the budget.
Okay. Let me just, as a sort of political observer, looking at you economists with a degree of skepticism at times, let's be clear. The reason why Mr. Modi came to power, one of the reasons, was that he was promising a high growth economy. 10 lakh jobs are being added virtually every month in this country. 10 lakh Indians are coming into the job market every month. If they're not provided jobs, that the hopes that Mr. Modi has unleashed can also lead to disillusionment. I think that's what Dr. Baru says in terms of last chance. This is a great opportunity. You don't have a big election now for at least another 8 months. Inflation is low. Oil prices are low. This is your great opportunity to kickstart the economy.
So 2 points. One, I think as far as last chance is concerned, it is the last political chance.
That's right.
It's not the last chance for the economy. As far as Big Bang is concerned, and several people have asked, and me and Arvind and all of us, what constitutes big bang? I do not know.
So it's not what
It
Ficky
is-
wants, right?
No,
I'm
there
just
is.
saying- Look,
One
this
second,
is
one
an-
second.
no, I'm just wondering whether it's just-
There
No,
isn't any big bang
often
left.
often the
There
criticism-
isn't any. Let me make it clear.
No, let me put it this way.
No big
No one
bang
wants Big
left.
Bang. I agree
No,
with
no,
Surjit.
if I can one by one,
Yeah.
let me just put it this way. Often the criticism of most of pre-budget programs or budget programs in television is that you cater to the men in suits or the women in this case, since you've got 66% reservation in Ficky. You know, you're catering to a small elite is what is suggested sometimes, and budgets, whether they are big bang or not, are judged by that. Do you believe that that's a fair argument?
No,
which is
because
made?
every budget I can remember had big expenditure programs for what you call Bharat or rural India.
Do you believe that should continue?
Well, it has to. You cannot have a budget which
Well,
ignores half
wait,
of India.
wait,
It's
time out.
it's a function of how it does it, right?
Okay.
There's a caveat there because of the finance committee recommendations that 10% is going to go for that. So anybody who comments on it must remember that you will see a reduction, looks like a reduction, but that 10% is going for health, education, welfare
Irrespective.
to the state.
So I've often wondered, do you judge the success? I'll take a break on this, but how do you judge the success of a budget on their ability of a finance minister to stir social spending, to ensure that the money is better targeted, better delivery?
Yes.
Or do you judge the budget on the basis of the way the stock market reacts or the way Ficky reacts?
Can I answer that?
Yes, and I'll take a break then.
First of all, what the Finance Commission recommendations suggest is that it's the state governments that are now required to spend more on health and education and the social sectors. I don't think it is any longer we should judge the central government's budget by how much they spend in these areas.
So we've moved, actually
Because-
that's an interesting point. We've moved away in a sense from a Delhi-centric worldview of how India is going to the way the states
in fact,
should now
there
look
should
at
be
it.
more television programs looking at state government
Correct.
budgets
And asking
them-
and asking them how they are spending their budget.
And if Akhilesh Yadav wants to spend money looking for gold under temples, he's allowed to do so, and the people will vote him out.
But
this
they-
is
But
the media has to inform.
Is that the way
Otherwise, how
industry?
will they
Is that
judge
the way
if
industry
they don't
also
have
sees?
information?
Is that the way the industry sees the future? That increasingly, while we may focus here in Delhi on the big budget day, it's not just about how Mr. Jaitley delivers. It's about how several state finance ministers deliver in the next 12 months.
Absolutely.
Are your eyes more on state capitals increasingly and not just on Delhi?
No, see, it's actually a holistic view. The states are getting more independence. They're going to get their finances directly. The states will have to stand up for themselves, and they have to be responsible for the expense that they are going to be meeting out. So Ficky is not looking for a big bang budget. I want to clarify that. We are looking for a budget which will show us the way forward, which will kickstart the development that the country needs. That's what we're looking at. That's not a big bang budget.
Okay, that's not necessarily a big bang budget. Let's take a break at that point. When we return, just a little bit more. You're watching this pre-budget special here on Headlines Today Ahead. Welcome back to this pre-budget special coming to you from Ficky, where we're looking at the challenges that lie before Arun Jaitley, the man who perhaps has the most difficult task to please everyone come tomorrow on budget day. The big question, of course, will those big bang reforms that the economic survey today talks about actually materialize? And what are those big bang reforms? Dr. Baru, before the break, you've been emphasizing that this is an opportunity. You're the one who said this is the last chance for Narendra Modi and Arun Jaitley, in a sense, to redeem themselves for what they did in July or didn't do in July. So what do they need to do? What are these big bang reforms? I'll come to all of you on that.
Well, you know, as Arvind correctly said, there are two aspects to the budget. One is fiscal management and the other is policy announcements. On the fiscal management side, I don't think any one of us expects big bang, apart from GST. I don't think any one of us. But on policy reforms, I think a lot can be done through the budget. For example, Bibek Debroy has this long list of laws which the government can say we will eliminate.
Archaic, outdated laws which will make it easier to do business in this country.
Reduce the Inspector Raj, reduce, you know, what did Narasimha Rao do in 91? You know, he made several departments of the government of India redundant. How many ministries have been made redundant in the last 20 years?
And yet there are far too many ministries even today.
Exactly. So with your, you know, social sector money being transferred to states, the education ministry, the agriculture ministry, the social sector ministries, huge downsizing of the government of India is possible. And if a finance minister announces all these as part of his budget speech, after all, the budget speech is the opportunity to make a State of the Union speech.
So that's the big
This is a
idea
good
in a
point.
sense. The
This is
big
a good
idea in a sense is that this is an opportunity to downsize government. We keep talking about it. Mr. Modi spoken about it, about less government, more governance. Sujit, your idea of a big bang,
Okay.
reform.
Yeah. As I said before, there is no such thing as Big Bang anymore left. So Big Bang has to be where the structure of the economy changes. Now, a couple of Big Bang ideas have already happened. One, which we have discussed, is why we read his report on devolution to the states. That's a Big Bang idea. GST, that's a Big Bang idea, which I think is already
Reform
in process.
agriculture, free up agriculture.
Now, there are two Big Bang ideas that I like to put forward, and I hope it happens sometime over the next couple of years. One is freeing up agriculture. Agriculture is the most controlled sector, not only in India, but anywhere in the world. One of the first things any developing country does is reform agriculture. What did we do? Throughout the last 66 years, we make sure that the farmers are told what to produce, at what price, and what quantity they'll sell, and to whom they'll sell. So that's the second Big Bang idea. The third one is really a flat tax, a flat income tax. That is a truly Big Bang idea. I don't think it's going to come tomorrow, but I think the thrust
Successive
should be
finance ministers have threatened to do that and have never done it because
And I
now
think
it's easier said than
that's an
done.
idea whose time has really come.
Because one of the challenges is, of course, to mop up revenues. I mean, that is going to be that's
with
the
a flat
challenge.
tax, you do that.
You believe that a flat tax from a revenue perspective, what are the Big Bang reforms that you would like? Is there anything that you'd like to see from a Big Bang idea that will give you a sense? I know that Jyotsna before the break said this is not. FICCI doesn't want a Big Bang budget, but maybe the country wants one. Maybe the country now wants something which will be seen as a transformative budget. Let's not call it Big Bang, but a transformative budget. What are those?
Okay, just to add to what she said, FICCI is not an island into itself. That we have our own thinking. We reflect the thinking of a lot of responsible responsible part of the corporate sector, certainly.
As well as some economists, I hope.
Yes, of course, of course. Just to answer your question on the revenue side, if you wanted one of the views we've expressed many times, I don't know how they're going to do it politically. I believe at least, yes, the weaker man on the income side must be protected. But when we create artificial differences between a population as to who must be taxed and who must not be taxed, we create gray areas, we create distortions. So perhaps one idea in the air is that today the highest slab on the income tax kicks in after 10 lakh rupees. Maybe every income in the country above 10 lakh rupees deserves to be taxed, for example. Now, whether that requires legal changes, do you have the political will and the freedom to do that? And if you want to exempt certain people on the weaker side, which is less than 10 lakhs, go ahead and exempt them. But why should people above 10 lakhs have any sort of... So these are some inventive ideas on the revenue side. But short of that, I do not think that other than GST, we are going to see any huge revenue jumps. What is going to be Big Bang, in my opinion, and what business as well as an average man would love to see, is that a clear roadmap, including implementation, on how the revenue spending of the government will be cut down, and within the fiscal limits that they are imposing, within their responsibility, how does capital spending keep on?
Better targeted subsidies, a roadmap for subsidies.
And too many schemes.
And I think the only test, like you say that, what is a Big Bang budget? What should it be aimed at? Even in the next 3 years, you say something today and achieve the results over the next 3 years. I think we have to measure it only on one metric, which is improving manufacturing, improving service, basically improving jobs. So we have to measure it only on one metric.
Whether you can create jobs. Is this a job creating budget you believe is the best way to measure a budget at the moment?
At this point of time, yes, because every budget has a different need and is at a different...
You made a good point that there are too many schemes. Let's be honest, one of the problems with the July budget was the finance minister kept announcing one scheme after the other, gave a very long speech, but it meant nothing. 100 crores for this, 100 crores for that. Yeah. That's not what the country wants. A job creating budget can't just be created through well-named schemes.
So you will know
and where the expenditure doesn't even then translate, because that's exactly
what's your
where
big idea?
So I think if we were to review the centre schemes and the schemes which the centre supports the state on, and really pick the few that matter and focus on getting those right, and those be in the public glare, both at the state level and the centre, we would do far better than having, there's some 60 odd schemes of, you know, different natures that sit there in these budgets, get announced every year. We have no clue as to where they go. So just a clean up, and they are legacy deals nobody wants to pull back. So why not, in the same way as we talk of cleaning out the old laws, let's clean out some of the old schemes and go for the few.
Can I Jyotsna, just get you, as a businesswoman, how difficult is it still to do business in India? I mean, let's be clear. The point I raised a little while ago, if an Indian today had a choice, you know, he's nationalist, proud of his country, but if he had a choice between investing in India and maybe even in the neighboring Sri Lanka to set up your next hotel, whether in Sri Lanka or in India, what would you do?
No, I would still set it up in India. That goes without saying.
But you also
That's for the camera, but go ahead.
No, it's absolutely correct. But yes, it is still very difficult to do business in India. I'm not going to run away from that.
You know, therefore, is that what the real idea is coming? Either a job creating budget or a budget that makes it truly easier to do business in
Both
India.
are the same.
In a sense, that would be a logical continuation of 91, 97. You mentioned 2007. That will please Mr. Chidambaram. But, you know, do you believe, Mr. Virmani, that is the logical extension of what we've seen over the last 23 years, from 91 to 2015, 24 years? Now give me a budget which really makes it easier to do business so that more jobs are created. Job creating business.
They are absolutely closely linked, but just let me say a little bit on what Nayana just said. I have seen every government add new schemes. I have seldom observed anybody cutting schemes. That, I agree, is the big idea. They have roughly 10 new things which they want to do. If they would cut at least 10 old schemes completely, that in some sense would be revolutionary.
So 10 old schemes and 10 old
just
laws.
cut them out. Rather than saying, okay, we'll gradually reduce it over the next 5 years, 10 years.
Basically, if we can cut 10 old schemes, 10 old government departments and 10 old laws, I mean, that would make life a little bit easier. And you believe that that really is the game changer in your view, the ability of the government to recognize that.
If Mr. Modi, who is a former Chief Minister of Gujarat, addresses a simple question, why is it that Gujarat, which was the home of India's textile industry, is no longer able to compete with Bangladesh, which has become the home of textiles in South Asia? How do I bring textiles back from Bangladesh to Gujarat? Ease of doing business.
Make in India and ease of doing business.
Make in India, employment generation.
And competitiveness.
Yeah, and,
okay.
and I want to add there that, and Jyotsna touched on the financing aspect, and nothing moves without finance, that we have a huge issue in the country of dependence on a banking system which right now is clearly overburdened with its NPAs, and really very little activity in the corporate bond market. And we cannot rely on a large infrastructure program without developing this corporate bond market. We need it for length and tenor of bonds that go 10, 15, 20 years. We need our pension funds and insurance companies playing in that space. And our pension funds today, while the regulation permits them, do not enter this space. So the real way that financing happens in infrastructure is banks step in initially maybe, but the takeout finance has to happen through corporate bonds as it does everywhere else in the world. But do we have a corporate bond market? No. Do we have a securitization market? No. Do we enable SPVs to be set up even in the renewable space called yield cos, which allow these sort of instruments
if it's to be done through the legislative route, as we know, it becomes tougher and tougher and tougher given the government's precarious position in the Rajya Sabha. But go ahead, Siddharth.
But this has to be the 91 of the corporate bond market.
Okay, you believe this has to be the 91 of the corporate bond market.
We will never get our projects financed.
Spoken like a good banker.
Like a capital markets
like a capital markets financial person. Yes, go ahead.
See, I'm just going to talk out of the box. There are certain things we suggested last year, and we are very happy to see the government actually followed it up with the way the government works. We said that there are many in the ministries where work gets, the same nature of work gets spread across different ministries. Why can't we have a sort of an umbrella structure? That we bring the various ministries under one umbrella
So, for
structure.
example, that you don't need a separate minister for small scale industries, one for heavy industries.
Yeah.
You don't need a separate
One
minister. Food, civil supplies.
Skill development.
Let's see, we've done
Look at water.
we've done very well with the power, the renewable energy, and the
That
coal
you
sector.
brought, but they still, you've got one umbrella energy ministry, but all the ministries itself are located in different buildings.
I think to compact them will take even more time, but at least the first step has been taken. So let us align our governance systems to the needs of the next 2 decades. For example, I mean, again, the wild idea, why do we need a Ministry of Labour and a Ministry of HRD, blah, blah, blah? Why can't we have a Ministry of Manpower? For example, the way, so, this is something that will enable labour and skills and skill development and education all to fall and give us the kind of people that we need for the future. I don't know if it can happen, but these are some of the ideas that
it's interesting that in a sense we are linking ease of doing business to the whole idea of downsizing government as well. Somewhere making government more efficient. Yes. I think that is a critical element of the ease of doing business will only happen when the government itself becomes more efficient. Sujit, let me give you a final word.
Yeah. And
come up with the craziest idea that you'd like to see Arun Jaitley do.
No. But ease of doing business, we are discussing what has he done so far.
Yes.
This is the number one thing that the government has emphasized since it came into power.
It has, but it has, as Deepak Parekh, I can only go by what I hear businessmen say. Businessmen say the intentions are right, it isn't yet translating on the ground. And that's where the last chance idea comes. This is the last chance in a sense.
The businessmen are impatient, etc., which is fantastic. We need checks and balances, we need pressure groups. But after tomorrow, there is no time left. That is where it ties in with what Baru is saying. That's the time has come now. No more excuses that we haven't had time, etc. I give them the excuse that, listen, 8 months, we know that the budget was coming, big policy announcements will come.
Okay.
If they don't come...
That's a good point on which to sort of end the program. But if they don't come?
If they don't come, then I think they've lost the opportunity.
Okay. So
it is... Yes. Rajdeep, 1 hour speech, no more. Crisp, short, sweet, well read, but not last year's two.
Okay, so if
one more.
No, leave it there.
No more 50 lakhs here, 5 crores there.
We've said that.
No more petty stuff.
Okay, so we want a short speech. That's the best. A short, sweet speech is the best way to hit the sweet spot, and we are running out of time. This is your last chance, Arun Jaitley and Narendra Modi, to show that Achhe Din truly can come. Last chance politically, in a sense. This is the moment that you have. Seize the moment is what is being suggested by industry and economists. This is the moment we will see whether Arun Jaitley can deliver or not. Thank you all very much for joining us on this special. If you've been watching, goodbye. See you tomorrow on Budget Day Analysis that starts at 9 a.m.